In today's video, we're taking a look back at the 2016 NHL Draft. Things almost worked out entirely different because of some massive trades that were being discussed and came very, very close to happening. There was one pick in the top three that threw everything off and caused it to be the way it is. We'll discuss how it could have been coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're taking a look back at the 2016 NHL Draft, mainly because two of the top three picks in Patrik Laine and Pierre Luc Dubois were just traded for each other, and there's been a lot of talk and speculation about deals that were being discussed now, as well as a little bit of revisionist history looking back at what almost was back then. As I said in the beginning, things almost turned out incredibly different. We know Blue Jackets general manager Jarmo Kekalainen has really always liked Patrik Laine. He's been a big fan and tried really hard at the draft to move up from the number 3 spot where he drafted Dubois up to number 2 to be able to get his hands on Patrik Laine. And Laine would have been a Columbus Blue Jacket from the very beginning of his NHL career, and things could have been very different. Now, as confirmed in a recent interview with Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick on the 31 Thoughts podcast, Kekalainen said that he tried like hell, was his exact words, to get Winnipeg to trade with him and move up from number 3 to number 2 to get his hands on Laine, but they just would not get the pick. When he was asked how close he thought he got, he said he didn't think he got too close, but did certainly acknowledge that he tried really hard and there was lots of conversations going on. But the number 2 pick that Winnipeg had, they just would not budge on it, which, understandably so. It should take a lot to get that kind of a pick out of a team who won part of the lottery here and got to move up into that selection. Now, of all the other teams that are involved in today's video, below them that were having lots of conversations and making deals, they were ready to roll. So essentially, like I said, what happens here? You see Matthews go 1, Laine goes 2, and then many expected Puljujarvi to go number 3. Now, what happened is as follows. The number 4 selection belonged to the Edmonton Oilers. Now, obviously, they had their eye on a couple of different players, and then, of course, below them was the Vancouver Canucks. The biggest part of this deal was that the Vancouver Canucks and the Montreal Canadiens, who were down further again, had a trade all worked out, but it was all contingent, of course, on Montreal moving up to that number 5 spot to get the player that they really wanted. Vancouver obviously felt like they could drop down and get the player that they wanted, and I do think based on who they selected here that likely would have been fine, and they probably could have been, maybe better off longer term. Difficult to say, but essentially what was in place was Montreal and Vancouver wanted to be able to go in and trade picks here, and they wanted to be able to send PK Subban from Montreal to Vancouver, and of course Montreal then would have been moving up into that number 5 spot where they wanted to select the big center iceman from Quebec, Pierre Luc Dubois. He would have been their first choice. At that point, they were still really not so deep at the center position. Obviously, as you know, they love to have players if they can with a French background, and he would have been the perfect player amongst what was available there. That would have been great for them. That would have been a great trade. I think they could have got their hands on Dubois. They were obviously looking to move Subban before they ever did. And of course, the Canucks were looking to improve their blue line at the time. And PK Subban would have been a huge add. I mean, we know right now, based on how PK is playing today, and last year wasn't great, maybe that wouldn't have been a great deal for Vancouver. But at the time, PK Subban was a top defenseman, putting up a ton of points, good puck mover, brought a lot of personality, a lot of excitement. And I think at the time, the Canuck fans would have embraced it, at least on a short-term basis. Hard to say how long, and if things would have worked out any different for Subban's career as well. Now, of course, they had to have conversations, though, with the Edmonton Oilers, who was picking ahead of them to kind of confirm who they were going to pick to make sure Dubois was going to be available, and they had it all worked out. Oilers were confirming for them that they intended to take, at the number 4 slot, defenseman Mikhail Sergachev. Now, of course, we know things didn't work out that way, and Puljujarvi ended up going to Edmonton. But their intention was to take Sergachev because they suspected that Jesse Puljujarvi was not going to be available. They fully suspected Columbus at number 3 to grab JP, and then he would not be available at 4. They would take Sergachev, get their stud defenseman that they were looking for at the time. The number 5 pick comes up for the Vancouver Canucks. They would swing a deal with the Montreal Canadiens, who would then send PK Subban to Vancouver. Montreal picks number 5, and they get Pierre Luc Dubois. Now, of course, that's not how things worked out. Columbus and Jarmo Kekalainen threw all that out of order by going off the board and selecting Pierre Luc Dubois. Now, of course, if he would have selected Puljärvi, like many suspected, you have a Finnish general manager, a really highly rated number 3 prospect from Finland. It was pretty much, most people had like a slam dunk guarantee they're taking Jesse Puljärvi, and they didn't do that. You know, in retrospect, they're probably glad they did, because ultimately they really wanted Laine, and even though they didn't get him, a few years down the road, now they have him. They got some good years out of Dubois, and for Columbus' standpoint, it was probably the right thing to do. I mean, obviously it's hard to say, though, what Jesse Puljärvi would have turned into had he as well started in a different franchise from the beginning as well. We know he had a difficult transition to North America. He looks way better, way more mature, looks like a whole different player. Longer term, the odds of things working out between Puljärvi and the Oilers are pretty darn good. At least that's how things look here today. So, of course, as we know, the Vancouver Canucks never traded that pick. They did not get PK Subban. They ended up taking defenseman Olli Juolevi, who's just starting now to get himself into the lineup. Got his first NHL goal the other night against the Ottawa Senators. We know the Edmonton Oilers took Jesse Puljärvi, not Mikhail Sergachev, because he was indeed available, that number 4 pick, and that he wasn't off the board. And like I said, we know how that worked out. And of course, Mikhail Sergachev, who the Oilers wanted, ended up falling a few more spots further down and ended up going to the Montreal Canadiens. And like I said, that really shook things out. Of course, we saw Sergachev be traded as well in a trade between Montreal and Tampa, which got the Habs Jonathan Drouin. So, like, you know, a lot of these top picks from this draft, even though it was a pretty good draft and lots of great talent up there, have been moved around. It's kind of a little bit weird. Not something you see very often, especially this early into their careers. I mean, most of these players are only anywhere from their first full season to, you know, 3rd or 4th, depending on where they're at. Some, like Puljärvi, gone back to Europe. So, like, you know, they're still really young. To see that many of them be moved is a little bit crazy. But obviously, you know, it's always fun to go back and do like a redraft, for example. And obviously in a redraft situation, I don't think you would see the Oilers take Puljärvi. I don't think you would see the Canucks take Juolevi. Things would be very different. You get Matthew Tkachuk in there as well. He's a bit of a wild card. And I can't help but wonder, even though the Oilers were telling Montreal and Vancouver they were taking Sergachev, and they very well might have. It would have been a terrific choice. I mean, you don't often get an opportunity to grab a stud offensive defenseman. So the fact that they had the chance, they probably did take it. But can you imagine? They could have also taken Matthew Tkachuk, and the pest from Calgary could have been on the other side of that Battle of Alberta. We've seen Matthew Tkachuk driving the Oilers and the Leafs and the other teams that they played in Canada in this Northern Division this year, kind of driving them all crazy. Things could have been very different if he was wearing a different uniform. I don't think he would be any different as a player, but it'd just be different to see different people getting agitated by his antics on the ice as well. So obviously, it would have really dictated a lot of different decisions by these teams had these picks and trades gone this way. Would the Vancouver Canucks have still made their other selections that they did? Would they have gone for Quinn Hughes in the draft later on, a few years down the road? I think they probably would have, because he kind of fell down to them in their favor. You have other opportunities here that Montreal, would they have taken Jesperi Kotkaniemi? If they had Dubois, and when that 2018 draft, when they got Kotkaniemi, they probably wouldn't have, really. I mean, they took him because he was a top-rated center. They passed over Brady Tkachuk. Yeah, that's a tough choice. Like, Montreal could have a Tkachuk. Edmonton could have a Tkachuk instead of Calgary and Ottawa. It could be extremely different. Like, a lot of other plans that these teams have made, even just 1 or 2 years later, likely would have been revised and changed based on performances and other players that would have went down, all with the swapping here that we're talking about from the 2016 NHL draft. So, of course, let me know what your thoughts are on this big trade that never happened. It really would have changed the whole order of the top part of that draft. A lot of these players would be in different places, and we might not have seen that big trade that just took place now between the Winnipeg Jets and the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, what if Winnipeg would have given in to Columbus and let them have Laine and, somehow swap picks for something else? Winnipeg was picking at number 3 instead of number 2. What would they have done? They could have maybe had Dubois from the beginning. That also could have thrown off the entire rest of what we talked about as well, because obviously, since that never got as close as the other stuff did, Columbus wouldn't have thrown off all the other stuff by taking Dubois at number 3. They could have done so by trading that pick and getting their hands at number 2 and taking Laine from the get-go. So no matter what, Columbus was the team here that was kind of, throwing things off and making things different. And really, it's worked out well for them. So I don't think they have absolutely any regrets. At the end of the day, Kekalainen got who he wanted. He just had to be patient and wait a little while. Plus, he got Jack Roslovic as a bit of a throw-in booby prize for a third-round pick, which to me is pretty good. He did a really good job getting a difficult situation looked after and bringing back some top talent to help the Jackets out and move forward. So let me know your thoughts on all of this. It almost happened down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.